This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development, providing graduate-level education to working professionals, online, on campus, and on-site. For more information, please visit study.stanford.edu.
Today we have Scott Jenson from Google. Scott has been involved in a number of major projects over the year, including, I guess, beginning with or almost beginning with Newton.
I was starting with Newton, yeah.
Back in the early days at Apple. So he's been in the area of thinking about mobile computing for a long time in various companies. I just learned today he also was a graduate and an undergraduate student here.
And graduate, yeah.
So Stanford is a return home. That's always great. He recently, for a while, has been working at Google in charge of design for mobile. And I don't think you need me to tell you that's an area of growing importance in design. And he has a lot of specific views on what does and doesn't work in that area.
Yeah.
I will let him.
Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, it probably seems a little odd that a guy from Google is going to tell you that the web isn't coming to your phone. Oh. But I think most of my life, I started off doing an awful lot of work at Apple. I did a lot of consulting. And it's a very painful business being a UI designer. I often feel that 90% of my work is making things not suck, okay? Because things are already decided for you, and they're set up, and you're given to them, and they usually want you to make a nice, pretty little icon, right, to fix it. And if you can't do that, then make it red, right? And so there is this whole idea about where does user interface fit in the project, and how do things happen, and in particular, the reason why I want to talk about this particular topic is that there's an awful lot of what I think is very sloppy thinking about what does it mean for the web and the phone to go together. So I'm not trying to say that internet on the phone is necessarily a bad idea, but the way we think about it is. So let's talk about just the kinds of things that do happen. This is a true story. I have a phone that's capable of doing web browsing, and I was on my way to the airport, as I tend to do occasionally, and I wanted to find out what my flight status was. So like, hey, I know how this thing works. I go to google.com on my mobile, I type in flight status, I get a link, I click on it, and you can't see a damn thing. There we go. Sorry. And this is what I see. Okay? It's okay. It's basically a page that looks like it could be a web page. It gives me nice little hints that it's got airport status and a whole row of identical submit buttons that do random things I can't figure out what they are. And this is kind of what, shall we say, your first, shall we say, experience with the web would be. Now, what ends up really happening is this is the web page I was going to, and because the web is built for desktop systems, I was going through a transcoder that converted it, and because these little icons over here were meant as graphics and they did not have alt tags on it, the transcoder didn't know what to do, and they just called them submit, right? And so when people try to play with the web and they say web is coming to your phone, these are the kinds of things. You know, a lot of UI design is about walking in other people's moccasins. And so people get really excited about the web on the phone and they don't actually do it. This is doing it, and this is the kinds of stuff that happens. Now, I get an awful lot of people that say, Scott, just chill, right? You got unlucky, right? Just go to a different site. I'm sure it'll be better. Come on, you're overreacting, right? So I'm going to go to, so fine, what should I do? Go to CNN. CNN is great. It's kind of new. So I went to CNN, and this is what I got. Okay? It didn't support my browser. Totally, locked me down. Couldn't go. Like, okay, fine, Scott. Really? You're really unlucky today. BBC is good. Go to BBC. I said, fine. I go to BBC, and here's the, just to lay this land, this is the home page on the web. I got no problem with this site. It's nice. It's got the title. It's got navigation. This is all good. So I go to, on my phone, mobile.bbc, okay, and I get something like this, which is now kind of like this nice, simplified mobile page. Okay, you can have breathe a little sigh of relief. Things are starting to work. Third time lucky, you know. And you kind of go, okay, well, this it works, but what does it feel like? What goes on? So you kind of go, well, what do I want? I want top stories. Okay, fine. So here's my top stories. Okay, by the way, I've had to wait, 10 to 15 seconds to get the second page up. Little weird things happening with word wrapping. So, things don't fit, so I get multiple line breaks, and so harder to scan. But, hey, it's kind of coming along. So I actually click on the story that I want, and the story that happens to be the top story on the web page is fourth here. I click on that, and now I get my actual story. Success, right? And so people will look at this and say, see, it's possible. The web on your phone is working, and you're reading this story. But what we want to do, though, is to say it's not that simple. Let's pull this apart a little bit. I already talked about the fact that what I got on the first page, up on top, right front, has to be 2 extra round trips. 15 seconds per page. I'm almost a minute into my experience before I even see the top story. That's step 1. Step 2 is that's the size of my screen. So instead of just simply looking at the page, I've got to not only look at the page, scroll up, and scroll. And then after all of that work, I'm rewarded by the observation that I'm on page 2 of 5. And I got to keep going. So I just got the teaser thing. Now, to be fair, on the web, you got the teaser thing too. So it's not quite fair. That's why I stopped right there. So what I'm trying to pull apart is that it's so easy in, shall we say, the marketing or the techno-apologist kind of mindset to say, it's not that bad, Scott. Chill. You can read the story, But when you added it all up together, it's kind of this phrasing that I call this death by 1,000 cuts. It's a well-known fact within the mobile phone portal business. One of their biggest things they do is they sell ringtones. They get all excited about ringtones. $4 billion industry, which is like 1% of their total revenues, so I don't know what they get so excited about. But every click that they do on the portal to find another ringtone is about losing 20% of the people because they just can't put up with just the frustration. And so what I'm seeing kind of in the valley is this kind of, we do it, but there's not this appreciation for what happens with normal people. And I think these little tiny things start to add up after a while. And it kind of leads me to this kind of fundamental UI design principle, which is just value has got to be greater than pain. It's that simple. And it's not a black and white world of it works or it doesn't, because reading that story is a fixed value. I will read it or I won't read it. I will like it or I won't. But how much glass do I have to crawl over to get it is a variable thing. And the more you have to crawl over, the more people you're going to lose. So statistically speaking, you end up losing quite a few more people about it. And I think it's very important. I know I'm talking basic ergonomics, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir on this stuff, but I don't see it when I talk to an awful lot of people or when I read about it on the web, about these kinds of things. So really, we could argue that the forbidden thing up there was just simply unlucky, and you know what? Over time, this kind of stuff will mature. I'll grant you that. This stuff does get better. We've had the mobile web now for, 10 years? It's taking its time, But it will get there. The fact that I get this transcoded web page, and the fact that even when I got a mobile-focused page, these, to me, are indicators of something a little bit deeper. It's like we're all excited about one thing. We don't appreciate why it's so hard, but we even step back a bit and say, why are we doing this in the first place? What's the value proposition here? And so for me, I like to say, where have we seen this before? And I just go back a little bit and take a look at the history of technology. Because there seems to be this idea that technology first comes out and we always seem to get it wrong. What's happening here? So when the telephone was first introduced, people got all excited about it, huge technical breakthrough. And what was some of the first things they were talking about they wanted to do with the telephone? They wanted to listen to opera from a distant city. It tells you an awful lot about who was writing the visions back then, Or at the same time, what did people want to do when film first came out? The first obvious thing that they wanted to do was to archive stage plays. Okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with these visions, but it's something that I like to call default thinking. I've written about this a couple of different places. And it's a natural, almost psychological aspect of how people interact with technology when it becomes available. I get something hot, get something cool. What do? I turn around, look at what I was just doing, and use it for that. Okay, it's like instant vision. Do what I do now better with this. Now, it's not wrong. Okay, it's just a path that we have to go through. And that's just, I think, what ends up happening so much with these kinds of things. We just kind of fall back on this ability to create instant visions and not try to figure out, A, what are the problems with this, or ultimately where will it end up. Now, people have argued that we have to go through this no matter what. It's just the process of growing up. It could be. But at least being aware of it might make us grow up just a little bit faster. So for me, this type of default thinking is totally exemplified in the late 1990s. I was actually at Symbian at the time working on mobile phone operating systems, and WAP was coming out. It was the big thing. And the thinking was simply like this. The web is hot. Phones are hot. Web plus phone is hotter. And it was that simple, right? Typical default thinking, but that's how the logic went. And people got really excited by this. Now, just to give you a little bit of perspective, because it's really important to know how blind this pressure can be. And, you know, by the way, I kind of got caught up in this too, so I'm almost an apologist at the time. So we can learn, you know. I'm not talking about the iPhone, okay? People are all gaga about the iPhone right now. I've got particular issues with it, and I'll be happy to talk about that. But they were getting excited about this. 3 lines. And not only that, that's one link. It's so long that the link actually has to wrap. And because of the power of this, there were huge billboards in London, showed kind of a Silver Surfer kind of guy on this board saying, surf the web on your phone. Only $10 a month. And so it's a bit ironic. I mean, you can kind of forgive people getting excited about the iPhone, but boy, how could they possibly have gotten excited about this? But they did, right? And so I'm just calling out the fact that we have to kind of know our history on this one a little bit. And this leads me to my favorite quote. I put this quote in almost every single talk I give. The trouble with the world is the stupid are cocksure and the intelligent are full of doubt. If there's one phrase that kind of summarizes the entire mobile internet, it's that one right there. So in light of that, I feel like it's important that I walk the talk. If I'm going to rail against how hard it is to work with mobile phones and how we've got to make sure we understand how it works and live within it, I want to give the rest of my talk in the format of a mobile phone. I really recommend that actually you consider trying this sometimes, because you will truly start to feel what it means to be on this friggin' small screen. Because it's easy to talk about, it's hard to execute. So what I've done so far, I've given you kind of my 2 kind of overview things, right? So here's a death by 1,000 cuts in default thinking. I've kind of given you that. I've kind of softened you up to realize that we almost have this kind of, you know, ergo thing, where it's harder than you think. And there's this vision thing, which is there's so much more that we could be doing. Okay, that's kind of the yin and the yang of my talk. Okay, but then we want to go forward a little bit. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit more of mobile history, because I think it's important, again, to kind of understand a little bit more about that. A few ergonomic myths I want to puncture a little bit, because again, to appreciate this a little bit more. I wanted to say ergonomic myths, but I couldn't fit the damn thing in because it was too long. And then our 20 IQ points. That's kind of a quote from Alan Kay, which is perspective is worth 20 IQ points. So I'm not just here to bitch at you for half an hour. I actually want to say, you know, once we understand these things, what are directions? How can we think about this? Why am I at Google doing mobile stuff, right? And then a couple of examples, because an example is a much more powerful way of kind of focusing a couple of points. So let's go to mobile history. When phones came out kind of in the 80s and kind of the early 90s, it was really obvious. Voice ruled. It was huge. Everybody got it. It wasn't a problem, and it was really straightforward. It's kind of, I have a mobile phone collection, by the way. I've got about 50 of them in my phone, in my house. My wife thinks I'm very strange. I guess it got a little bad because I actually have a felt-lined drawer where I can kind of put them, you know. But early phones are fascinating because they were just like telephones. Again, a slight example of default thinking. They just had dial buttons, okay? They didn't even have histories, right? They just dialed. And they slowly started to grow. But it was a clear, obvious proposition. It was a good example in that case where default thinking did kind of work a little bit. The curmudgeons at the time that were kind of railing against mobile phones didn't get it. They're like, what's the big deal? I'll just walk over to a payphone and put the quarter in, you know, as opposed to the fact that I'm on the go and what types of things does it help. Just like ATM machines really kind of empowered a huge number of people to be social because you didn't have to get your money on Monday between 10 and 2. And then you had to get enough of it out so that you could actually have a beer on Friday. ATMs kind of allowed you to be kind of a time slob. You could kind of go out and have no money at all and find some, right? ATMs is an example of technology allowing people to be people, right? Phones are the same way. You can be late, you can be early, you can be forgetful, and phones allow that to happen. That's not the typical phone pattern you get with landline phones. So anyway, so phones came and kind of changed everything with voice, and people got excited. Now, then came the thing that some say changed everything, some say ruined everything, and that was SMS. And it's really important to understand that SMS was this technical protocol that was kind of in the standard, was not meant to be a consumer service at all. It only worked within certain, like if you were on Orange in the UK, you could only send messages to other Orange users. It wasn't the kind of universal thing you have now. It was buried deep in the menus. Horrible little interface. It was anybody who looked at that, any UI person would have thought it was absolutely the stupidest thing they'd ever seen in their life, and it took off like wildfire because the value to the user was so great. At the time, the value was because of cost. It was very expensive to make phone calls. It was fairly cheap to do SMS. But then as that started building up the community, people started understanding the other values to it. You could do it when you were in a crowded environment, so you could communicate people and not expose yourself. You could communicate with someone who talked too much and you just wanted to say, I'll be late, right? You could kind of manage that's it. Thank you, okay? There were all sorts of social things. In fact, there's a book that Richard Harper has edited called The Inside Text, which I recommend. By the way, I recommend that you get it from the library. It's expensive. Which talks about a lot of this history and how the value of SMS has kind of evolved over time, but it became quite huge, okay? Now, SMS is considered a form of data, but all of a sudden the operators started getting a little bit greedy and realizing where it was going, and they started realizing, well, wait a second, if we got real web on this thing, then the default thinking kicked in, right? So effectively, there were three very quick mistakes that happened in succession. I can talk about them in detail, but let's just, for the sake of argument, just kind of put them away, because they're all exactly the same thing. Basically, they wanted to bring WAP to the phone. We've already talked about that one. SyncML. Who has heard of SyncML? Show of hands, please. Okay, there, proves my point. SyncML is a way of kind of organizing your data between the desktop and your phone, and it's primarily a PC-driven concept. I want my emails, I want my contacts, I want my bookmarks, just synchronized to my phone. And it was a basic technology that was pretty cool, but they completely forgot the obvious things of like configuration. It was a horrible mistake, not well motivated, and it's died. For a while there, I was working with the New Zealand government trying to set up a research consortium for mobile phone services. And I'll never forget, I went to it was Taiwan, went to an operator, and we were trying to talk to them about the fact that they had to go beyond these PC-based services. And they said, well, I'm sorry, we can't work with you right now. We're very busy over the next 6 months releasing SyncML. I'm like, really? Okay, because I knew this wasn't going to work very well. I said, why are you doing it? Everybody else is. And we can't be left behind. So I could talk about, shall we say, the myopia of the phone industry, but that's at least another two-beer conversation. But the point is that there's an awful lot of things that are happening because of the pressures in the industry, not because they're well-motivated. And the last one is MMS. MMS is a camera phone sending things, and again, classic example of default thinking because, you know, phones are hot, cameras are hot, phones plus cameras hotter. Exact same mantra that's going through all this stuff. And what they failed to realize was that the number one thing you wanted to do was to not send somebody a picture. The number one thing you want to do is to take a picture. Okay? And the biggest problem people have is they had a camera here and they had a phone here, and effectively they both have batteries, they both have screens, they both take up a large amount of space in my pocket. So there's an understandable user need to just get rid of the crud from my system. Now, there's a huge design problem about merging things together, right? So I'm not trying to say that merging them is the right thing to do, but there's a user value to merging them from just purely the bulk point of view. So anyway, MMS is slowly succeeding. And again, in the spirit of not being cocksure, none of these things are necessarily wrong. They're not necessarily dead. The world is gray. It's not black and white. These things are coming along, but they're not the kind of things they were touted to be. They didn't kind of take the world by storm. We're slowly seeing, by the way, some MMS value coming up, but it's still taking some time. So let's now go to the ergo myths. Okey-doke. Now, the two things I guess I wanted to point out a little bit is, again, I'm seeing an awful lot about people are getting all excited about the screens getting bigger, and they're all excited about the fact that, or they somehow think that because it's just like a computer, the web can just move to it. And again, depending on how much you're plugged into HCI, I'm probably speaking to the choir on this one, but there's some things we just have got to kind of puncture just a little bit. Let's go with screen size. If you take a look at the pixels that are available on phones, it's hard to believe, though, that like 18 months ago, this was the dominant phone screen size, 128 by 128 pixels. And it very quickly grew. And so the phone that I have right now, this very overburdened and slightly clunky Nokia E70, has got 352 pixels by 416. And it's like, well, of course, look at this. It's getting bigger. Scott, again, relax. You know, Moore's law. Things will get bigger. You'll be fine. Just, we'll grow our way out of this problem, right? Let's take a look at the physical, actual dimensions of these screens, okay? Instead of looking at by pixels, let's look at it by millimeters, okay? I color-coded them the same. So here's the first screen, normalized to 1, of the 120 by 128. So we take a look at the next two screens, and what do you know? They're getting bigger. So there's a trend starting. And you can kind of forgive people for kind of getting the idea that things were getting better. But now take a look at the next two screens. That was a big difference. Okay, and how about the new, and by the way, this 240 by 320, which is kind of the new standard for all consumer phones today, is that. It's just because what ends up happening, of course, is the dot pitch is getting smaller. This is not rocket science. So what's happened, though, is because the web is talked about, oh, is it 640 by 480? Is it 800 by 600? Is it 1024 by 768? These are kind of like code words we have to talk about screens. We've kind of got it in our DNA that we've got to be talking about pixels. If you talk about phones, you've got to talk about millimeters. Okay, Nokia phones are quite good about this. In fact, the earlier Nokia, I adore, by the way, early Nokia phones. Later Nokia phones I'm not quite so happy about. Earlier Nokia phones took this very seriously. They were the first company that did proportional fonts. They were the first company that actually had decent sized fonts. They actually have fonts that are usually between 2 and 3.5 millimeters. 3.5 millimeters, by the way, is enormous on a phone size, and it makes it nice and readable. It's really quite nice, especially because this is not a well backlit phone screen, but something that you have to read on a bus while you're moving around like this. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons for having these bigger size fonts. Now, what ends up happening, though, is even though you have 9 times the pixels, you're only getting 50% more characters on the screen. That's why I want to make sure people think that this is not a panacea. That's not going. Now, to be fair, because I don't want to be cocksure, let me show you the iPhone. Okay? That's a big deal, right? That's better, okay? That's a big deal. That's better, okay? So all of a sudden, it's possible to say that we're maturing and we're growing and things will be getting better. I would claim, though, that even though it's better, it's just a little bit better. If you're going to go to CNN.com, if you're going to be going to MySpace, if you're going to be going to Amazon, you're still going to be having some problems with this. And while it's better, it's still... So again, I'm not trying to say that we'll never grow out of this problem. And in fact, I do think 10 years from now, if we were to have rollable screen technology, retinal projection, there's lots of cool ways we could grow our way out of this problem. For now, though, this is what we have to deal with. I just want to make sure we talk about that. Okay, next one, mouse schmouse. It's always amazing to me, again, how many people can assume that you can just take a web app and just kind of just remove a few menu items and it'll work on the phone. And just to kind of I highlight just a couple of points, it's such a different environment, it's just kind of hard to know where to start. You've got multiple highlights, 0, which is a very important number, up to a nearly infinite number of ones. You can do copy and paste, you've got lots of menus, and the big one on the web these days is hover. These are all gone from you. So you've got a single highlight. Yeah, like right, you're going to copy and paste on a phone. Okay, one menu and no hover whatsoever. So the kind of model that I use to kind of put it in perspective is that on a mobile phone, your cursor is shoveling, right? You can't get rid of the cursor practically, right? It's just always there and you're moving it around. It's a very different model. So when you're thinking about it, you just have to kind of realize that it's like stone knives and bear skins, a much simpler set of toolkit you have to use. And what ends up happening is that, again, like I'm trying to do these slides in a small thing, as you start to build apps, you begin to appreciate how much smaller it is. Okay, our 20 IQ points. I've kind of rambled on quite a bit about ergonomics. Okay, let's kind of just put that one aside. Let's now talk a little bit more about this whole default thinking social flow. Where are we going? How do we think about this? I think there's a very interesting parallel we can draw between the web and phone. And let's start off with, I'll admit, a fairly high-level distinction between Web 1.0 and 2.0. There's an awful lot of subtleties here. The classic idea of Web 1.0 is that you had these big iron in the sky, these servers, and they were doing things like news, they were doing things like shopping, GM was doing things like brochureware, And it was primarily data in the sky that the great unwashed would then have the ability to access, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. People got excited. It was great. There's a lot of good stuff there. But that was kind of the idea of we just consumed, right? The next step, though, was this idea about Web 2.0. And again, there's a lot to talk about Web 2.0. I'm kind of verging on slightly oversimplification here, but the point was more just the idea that you do have the idea of a few people in the center who are now actively involved with the server. They're helping create the content. Wikipedia, eBay, Flickr, all these kinds of things are now going on. The subtle point I guess I want to put out, though, is that it's not like the entire world here is in the center. It's really a small percentage, between, say, 1 and maybe 10% of the users are actually doing it, and we still have the great one washed to the side consuming it. I go to Dig. I go to eBay like I would go to CNN or like I would go to Amazon. I still go and read. I still go and I buy. But there's this cool freshness about it that it's been democratized. So it's still a model of me having to go to some place to do something. I've got to fire up my browser. I've got to launch it and so forth. Where we take it totally differently is the people point of view. And this can be applied, I think, if you squint your eyes, you can apply it to phones as well as SMS, and probably even email, by the way, as well. Email isn't quite discussed in the same vein, which is that once you've got people out there and you give them a bunch of phones, what happens? Does this show up okay? Can you see the little dotted lines? Okay, you get this really messy, cool, social bubbling thing going on. You've got friends, you've got family, you've got work, you've got a boss bugging an employee, you've got an ex harassing, the old ex. I mean, people are just being people here. And in fact, all we're doing is taking what happens in real life and extending it over distance. Okay? It's really about point to point. And my feeling is that if we're going to get out of default thinking, we have to say, this is the value. This is what got people really excited about phones and SMS. They both build on this same idea. People just being people and doing this point-to-point stuff. And how do we then enhance and grab that? Now, clearly, there's no reason why we can't have clouds of servers there to back in and support, but it now becomes much more of a, I don't go to a server, I go to you. I go to you, and I see something about you. And that's a much more important way of thinking about it. So I feel like, in a way, the Web 2.0 world is kind of heading this way, right? I mean, email clearly has forms of this, and we're getting much more interesting things like Twitter, which is coming along. And Twitter, by the way, has anybody used Twitter? Okay, Twitter is an SMS system where you go in and you put your friends into it. You dump your social network into it, which is a little bit of work, and they've got to sign in, and there's problems with that. But if you can get over that hurdle, I can send an SMS to that group, and it gets broadcast to everybody else. At first thought, this seems like classic blog. Oh my God, why would I want to share, what I'm eating right now and so forth? But it raises a really interesting question about people wanting to be more connected. What's going on? It's kind of a form of your status message in your iMessage kind of being propagated to your friends. And they have a fascinating idea about it being available on the web as well as on the phone. So I can kind of be twittering on my way to work. I sit down at the desktop and I can kind of continue the whole experience. So it's kind of pulling my social world into the desktop world, kind of in spite of the web's concept. So I think it's kind of, those are very interesting directions. So in a sense, the web really focused on servers, and the phones are more focusing on people. And so that's the direction I want to focus on. Just trying to figure that out and kind of push that a little bit harder. So what does this mean? Okay, I've chatted about Ergo. I've chatted kind of about just kind of default thinking and where we should be. I want to give 3 specific examples. The first one is the strongest one, and I feel best about it because it has nothing to do with my company. Right? So I feel like I can champion it, and you don't think I have an ulterior motive. And that was a banking example that occurred in Sweden about 7, 8 years ago. Again, this is the time when the WAP was going crazy, and people said, of course, what you want to have on your mobile phone is access to your bank account. You want to see your balance, you want to make deposits, you want to transfer money, and the list was huge, right? It was completely dead on arrival for all the reasons I talked about. We can talk, I can give you the details, but it's boring, right? The classic examples, they confuse technology with user need. This very sharp Swedish bank came along and said, what's really going on here? What do people truly want? And they asked, and they found out that what they really wanted to know is when their bank balance was getting too low. When am I about to overdraft? The other thing they wanted to know was, when did my deposit clear? So I now know I can go out and spend money. There was a very simple solution. Customer would walk into the store, or the bank, they walk into the bank, and they'd say, hi, do you have a mobile phone? Yes, I do. We have this service. Would you like to have it? Yes, I would. What's your mobile phone number? Shh. Done. They've now installed the application, right? All they needed was the mobile phone number. And what would happen is, at any random point during the day, you would get an SMS that says you now got, you've just overdrawn, or you've got $10 left, or whatever the number it was, or you got like your bank balance cleared. It gave people almost all of the value with absolutely zero interaction. They didn't go to a server and log in and do it. The server came to them, okay? Totally revolutionized the whole thing. They even charged for the service, by the way, and signed up a tremendous number of people for it. And to me, it was just like, they got it. It's really clean, it's really simple. And unfortunately, because it's so simple, it's almost not exciting. People don't care about it. It's like, but it worked. So, a much more mundane example is what we're trying to do with Google search on the mobile phone. I'm still not convinced personally that people want to search for Mazda brake pads on their mobile phone. There's this idea of what are you doing on your mobile phone and what are you trying to do. So there's two things that we've been considering doing right now. This is available right now. It's not, like I said, it's not terribly insightful because other companies are doing it right now, but it's the idea that an awful lot of people, when you're mobile, do very repetitive things. We kind of have this thing in Google. We talk about the 3 basic user scenarios. The urgent now, I need to know something right away, like a flight or something like that. The repetitive now, or the daily now, things I do all the time, over and over and over again. And the bored now. I need to be entertained. And in a sense, the search box is trying to handle some of your bored now, your urgent now stuff. You type things in, it'll get you your answer, and off you go. The fact that we can actually take the iGoogle, we have something called iGoogle. I'm not trying to sell you guys on it. I just want to give you the example that on the web page, you can add to your Google homepage various modules that tell you things, weather, sports, and so forth. If you configure it on the web, you can now take that experience with you, right? So doing nothing, just you go to this page and your web stuff shows up with you. So you can kind of access it both places. And that's what's nice about that is no typing, right? And stuff that you just want every day. Bring that in. And the other one is the fact that this is going to be announced. I think it's fair enough to say that this is not a big deal, but we're coming up with new versions of search so that when you actually type like coffee or REI or whatever, instead of giving you all the web pages for coffee or the web pages for REI, we're going to give you the REI that's close to you, the coffee shops that are close to you. Because when you're on a phone, what do you want to do? You want to call, okay? You don't want to surf the web necessarily. So we're going to start augmenting and moving up results so they actually do represent a more mobile-focused task. So I would claim this is very low-hanging fruit, but it's an example of one way that we're going to slowly turn the boat a little bit. The last example I wanted to give was Google Maps. I joined Google about 18 months ago. Google Maps was almost done. It was an outside team we acquired. They did a really amazing job. It was a very good product, but it was another example of assuming an awful lot of defaults from the way the web did. So the way it worked was, I'm not sure if you can see this very well, when you launched it was a map, which I thought was a good decision. Instead of making you have to go through stuff, it just showed you a map right away. And it had a menu and it had the ability to do search, because we're Google, we search, right? So you then, as you moved your way through, if you wanted to change anything, let's say you wanted to move around, you actually had to go into the zoom menu item, and the zoom menu item would bring up this little zoom controller exactly on the web. And already you can see a couple of problems, right? This is the exact controller that they used, which allowed the mouse to then go over and grab it and slide. You can't do that anymore. You've got to take over the up and down arrows. So you've got to be into a mode, which drove this thing into this particular corner. And then when you were done, you actually returned back to where you were. When we user tested this and found this out, what a surprise, the small screen had a very large impact on it. On the web, if you kind of want to go from Palo Alto to Mountain View, you kind of would drag, or you would just look, okay? On the phone, it's very clear. People would zoom out, step over, and then zoom in. You get this kind of hippity-hoppity thing going on, okay? That was totally forced by the ergonomics of the phone. So totally different usage model, even though it was at the superficial level doing the same kind of thing. So we changed it. We changed, which, by the way, this was a hugely controversial thing, and there's actually still people on the web that love to hate this decision. I love that. But in fact, it was choosing the web model. So what we did instead was we tried to take advantage of the controller at the time. So in addition to being able to kind of go up, down, left, and right, we wanted to take advantage of what the do it button in the center, the select button, was going to do. And in that particular case, we changed it, if you notice, to if you zoomed out this way, it actually zooms you out. If you press on the inside, it zooms in. So if you pressed in, it actually zooms in and then it timed out. So you just click, it would come in, and it would pop you there. If you click it multiple times, it would zoom in lots of times, and so forth. Now, the first question I get all the time is, this is harder to learn. Could not agree with you more. Every single time we tested this, people didn't get it for about 15 seconds. Okay? Because it's like, zoom minus. Where's zoom plus? God. I always, and they would zoom all the way up to see the whole planet, you know? And then we would, you know, you'd sit on your hands, and you just kind of wait, you know, and they browse on, and then they click the center button. They kind of go, of course, right? And now what happens is that the #1 user use case, which is navigating, browsing, flying through this space, is now all done with the center locus of control. And we did lots of studies on this and found out the same kind of bump in the curve, and it works beautifully well. I love reading the blogs that hate this and have no experience and no design, and they just kind of go. And so I love the fact that this is a really interesting trade-off, because I will absolutely grant that ease of learning was sacrificed. But like I said, we got a ton of data showing it's actually okay. So not necessarily that I want to defend, okay, I am defending this, but the broader point is the fact that there was a very different usage of maps. We can quibble about my design. Okay, I'm very willing to quibble about my design, but that's kind of separate from the point that there's a very different usage of it. Okay, so summary. The idea so far was that mobile phones are really almost about death by 1,000 cuts. Some of them will mature and will grow out of. My claim is most of them we won't. So we just got to be very aware of that. Default thinking is why we're here in the first place. We think this is the obvious thing to do, so we just keep pressing. And you know what? Eventually it'll just get better. And I'm trying to say, no, that's not always the case. And then I talked about ergonomics, servers versus people. And I do believe there's a path. We just got to be very cocksure about it. So that's all I have for now. And I very much would like to take the rest of the time to answer questions. Thank you very much. Yes.
So the WAP idea was that people who ran web pages would care enough about mobile users that they would do something special for them. Do you think there's still a chance that anybody will do this? That some websites will have a dual track?
Many are doing it, and I think it is part of this gray path, right? There's a lot of, and in fact, I think there are some very good sites that are trying to do web-specific things that will find value. It's just that it's a lot of work, it's hard to do, and it's kind of growing slowly. But we're seeing stuff. Yeah?
Out of curiosity, if you made it more difficult for people to learn the new UI, is there a reason you didn't do a first-time run, quick little tutorial for people, so that the first time they ran it, they would see it? Did you guys try that and find out?
I think that's an excellent idea. I mean, that makes an awful lot of sense. What we did do is we found that there is still a category of people that will go to help, not many. What we did find, though, we did a sneaky little thing where we actually put Zoom in the menu. Because people don't go to help, right? You actually, I've seen user tests where they're like, help? God, no. You know, and they keep on going, you know. It's a classic problem, right? So what we did is, instead of calling it help, we called it Zoom. So people would, if for 3/4 figured it out within, like I said, 15 seconds. Other quarter didn't. They'd go to the menu, they'd see Zoom, and Zoom would bring up this dialog box that says, to Zoom, hit the center button. It worked really well. You had to trick them. Yeah?
I'm just curious if you tried Stylus to solve the cursor problem. What would be the main problem with that?
Which stylus are you referring to? Which phone?
The stylus that hasn't been invented yet.
Yeah, I mean, right now, the vast majority of phones today have what we call the 5-way controller and the 2 soft keys, which is unfortunately, I think, becoming the fluted columns of mobile phone design, you know. So that's kind of the playground we have to have. There are clearly the trios and the high-end Windows smartphones that actually do have styluses and so forth. And I think they do add something to it. There's no doubt about it. It's a slightly different model. It's closer to the web. One of the reasons why the mobile space is so frustrating is because you have such vastly different models to work with. So, so in fact, we've ported GMM, Google Mobile Maps, we've ported it to stylus-based systems. So you can click and you can drag, and they make definite improvements in that sense. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Has anybody tried to make a sort of a universal translation program that would take
HTML and convert it to all the different kinds of screen sizes.
That's what transcoders are trying to do. They've been around for a very long time. Google had a very bad transcoder about 1.5 years ago, and we switched on this new one, which is significantly better, and we've noticed our traffic going up significantly because of it. The problem is that it can only, remember that BBC screen I showed you? I mean, what can you possibly do algorithmically to fit on a screen 40 times smaller? I mean, there's only so much you can do, right? That's where I think the longer term solution is, I think what you're referring to here, is that you rewrite the page for mobile users. It's still going to have problems, but if the value is there, at least reduce the pain a little bit.
Do you think that we'll eventually get to the point where we have a few different standard screen sizes, and that way maybe you only need to design a dozen different types of transcoder programs?
I doubt that very much, just because technology is changing so fast.
But people's eyesight will never change. I mean,
no, but just when you think you got to figure it out, someone's going to smack you upside the head. I mean, whether it's retinal projection, whether it's ink, pink paper, I mean, you're going to get humbled really fast. So I really can't imagine it really stabilizing. There's just too much cool stuff out there. Yeah.
Yesterday evening, I heard a talk by experienced designers, and she was making a point that anytime you cross a camera with a computer, you get a computer. You cross a toaster with a computer, you get a computer. My question is, you essentially talk about the telephone and not on the Palm and the BlackBerry and other, when the communication device is actually secondary, and it's also a feature of a computer. So if it is a computer, it's a small handheld computer, you have more real estate, and like you just said, more. The model is different. So it's going to
I understand your point. I'm not sure I heard your question.
Well, I mean, my question is, a lot of the points that you are making may become not moot, but it's easier to deal with. So why not focus from Google point of view on serving that model, and as a result, give me more incentive to buy a Palm or a BlackBerry rather than to use a regular telephone?
If I felt that the long-term value was to kind of like splash about in web space on a phone, that would make a lot of sense. I feel like there's just so many more interesting things that you can do, the whole default thinking thing. I personally do not believe that looking for Mazda brake pads or whatever on the phone is where ultimately we need to be. I think this ability of me having my contacts, all of my web stuff available to me, things arriving to me automatically, me being kind of connected to my world, this is a much richer place to be. And so I'm kind of basically leaving the sandbox, is my argument. Yeah.
Just along those lines, you made a side comment that you could have more things to say about the iPhone. What's your sense of the iPhone?
I'll be the first one to buy one. Okay. I think that it is definitely an example of why you can't be cocksure, because I think it does change quite a few things. My downside to it is that I believe it's perpetuating this myth to a certain extent. That it's like, oh my God, I really can do the web. And they're going to do it, they're going to go, well, I can do it better. And so that's my only concern, is that it's going to kind of keep us thinking that way. In particular, the browser is what I call a thick glass browser. They have this thick glasses, the fact that they're taking control of my web experience. So I go to CNN.com and they're going to shrink it down. When I click, they're going to steal my click, and on my behalf, they're going to zoom in on something. Okay, so that's actually very clever, and that could be quite interesting. But it's the proxy of me in this interaction. I'm really interested to see what's going, because the web is trying so hard to go AJAX with drag and drop. Can you drag and drop with the iPhone? I mean, I hope so. I feel most likely it won't. So in effect, the iPhone will get us to Web 1.0. It won't allow us to do Web 2.0. So I think there could be a certain amount of frustration with the fact. And again, they're doing amazing things with what they're trying to do. So I'm applauding the effort. I just think until I see it, I'm worried it's going to come up very short. If that answers your question. Yeah.
So your three searches were, let's see if I can remember, they were urgent now,
Daily now.
Bored now. I think there's a fourth one, which is, for example, you recommended the Richard Hartford book that he edited. And,
right.
And I happened to write that down in my notebook, and I'm going to go back up and get it off Amazon. But it seems like there's the at some point in the next week, I'd like to buy Richard Harper's book.
Yeah.
It seems like you could have a two-phase interaction of some kind where you go, I might put into my Google queue Richard Harper, and then on my desktop homepage it pops that up somehow. Have you? Does that make sense? Have you explored that at all?
Matt Jones, who has worked out of New Zealand, and he's worked with Gary Marsden out of South Africa, has done a really interesting set of work about this kind of distributed collection thing. So what'll happen is, I think his paper was about you'd capture the snippet, and you'd say Richard Harper, or you'd say, and then when you got back to your desktop, it had already synchronized and had done a Google search for you. So it kind of was not only collecting, but helping you find stuff, if that's kind of getting to your point. I think that's a fascinating point. And again, it goes to this idea, my talk, the social web thing didn't motivate quite the my stuff organization. And I think that's a whole other topic I could have spent more time on, which is I want my stuff to be available to me whether I'm on the web or on the phone, right? And so I think that's a very good example of how you should be able to put something on your phone and it just kind of goes up for you. So I would agree with that task. Part of the issue, of course, is, just like, I feel people that want to put an MP3 player, a camera, and a phone into one box have got a significant challenge in front of them. And again, the iPhone seems to be taking a very interesting approach to that. I think putting all these functions into your phone is also going to be a bit of a challenge too. So, but by the way, one thing I really liked recently, I just discovered, was this product called Vox, and it's basically this kind of bloggy, mob blog type stuff where what I capture is automatically uploaded. And they haven't released it yet, but there's a new version that's coming out that every picture I take and everything that I record is just automatically uploaded to my website for me. And that strikes me as a rather interesting model as well, which is no UI. What I do just gets saved. Now, of course, it can be done safely. I'm more of an old fart. I want it to be protected. Whereas my son is going to say, I don't care who sees these pictures, right? And that's a new generational gap thing, but that's another topic altogether. Yeah.
Anybody working on speech interaction for a phone application?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm just saying that I kind of expected to hear a lot about that with this talk, but I didn't hear anything.
All I can talk about right now is what's currently shipping. All I can say is speech is very important and speech is very hard. The biggest issue, of course, is how do you interact with the speech and how do you interact with it within the proper context. Those are actually quite hard things to do. You also have a huge number of very nasty data connectivity, stone knives and bearskins issues with dealing with current technology as to how do you capture these things and how do you transmit these things and so forth. So unfortunately, most of the work we're spending on this is just getting around the obvious, my God, why doesn't this work kind of stuff. But let's just say that there's my personal take on it is that just like SMS is incredibly powerful because you can do it so quietly, I think that voice is really valuable when you're in the car and when you're totally on your own. But there are times when voice is not a panacea, right? So you have to be careful how you use it. So unfortunately, I'm not giving you a good answer.
Does that mean is anybody using it?
Well, they can't use it yet because we haven't shipped it.
I mean, not with Google, but
Yeah.
anything.
Well, Tell Me has released a very interesting app. I don't know if you've seen that one, which does it, and they do a very nice job. I think that's very, very interesting. What you'll find is classic problem. Almost no one's going to use it, unfortunately, because very few people actually have data plans. But that's going to change, right? I mean, right now, the whole idea is that we need to figure this stuff out and play with it, even though the market's not ready for it, because the market will be ready eventually. So I would definitely point to Tell Me as a very good example of how to make this thing work.
What is their application?
It's just, you launch it, and you click it, and it goes, city and state, and then you kind of go, what do you want? And you kind of go pizza, and then it gives you a list, and you get a map.
And why do you think nobody will use it?
No. People will use it. It's the crawling over glass problem right now, which is that it's just hard to get data plans in the United States. And so it will come. It will absolutely come. So I'm not dissing Tell Me in any way. Yeah. It's just so hard to talk about vision and execution because they just messed up so much. Yeah.
You were talking about the transcoders that are taking the content and I guess they're WAP-I, converting it to WAP?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. You didn't speak to alternate style sheets, like style sheets, mobile style sheets as opposed to screen style sheets?
CSS, you mean?
Yeah. And do you think that's going to have any impact? Can you just maybe speak to that at all?
It's another tool that allows you to write mobile-specific stuff. And in fact, WAP 2.0 is effectively XHTML, which is more restrictive, HTML, which is much more style sheet based. And in fact, we're using CSS quite a bit in our new products for just that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, you made a number of comments where you end with "in this country." How much of what you see going on in Japan and Korea and so on is what we're going to be coming to, and what kind of inspiration do you take from that?
It varies quite a bit by country. Europe has got an advantage of a much more open environment. We are not quite so beholden to the carriers, which is very nice. It's actually, I think, quite difficult to kind of tie people into you don't get the 2-year contracts that you get. But they still have a huge problem with data, because everything in Europe is metered. So that really holds things back. Japan is amazing. It's really incredible what they're doing there. And our mobile usage in Japan is significantly higher. Because, again, there's lots been written about this, how like they didn't have a lot of home computers, so when the phones came out, they got mobile SMS type email going on. I actually remember reading just the other day about the fact that there are people who buy phones in Japan that don't talk on them. They just use them for chatting, and shopping. So it's really huge. And so we're actually thinking that we're actually rolling out some products in Japan that we aren't doing in the United States because they're much more receptive to it. So, yeah.
When you're developing mobile apps at Google, how do you deal with the device fragmentation problem? You run them on, is it Java, or how do you get around that? Do you port each one to each device?
How much time do you have? It's really painful. Historically, we had a system where we would try to make it run on everything. And so we had a very aggressive transcoder, and we had a very aggressive mobile search system, and so our pages. And we had some very smart people that are working very hard to make sure that these things would render on all these devices. And it is mind-numbingly, frustratingly complicated. So we finally just said, this is getting too hard, especially because new phones that have come out this year, are getting so much better that we could start, for example, we can start using CSS, we can start to use tables. And so we're starting to kind of create, when a phone comes in and does a request, you can actually get what's called a user agent ID, and you can tell what kind of phone it is. And so we're starting to create, shall we say, different buckets that allow people with proper phones to have a much better experience.
So does Java help with that problem at all?
Yes and no. I mean, Java has the huge advantage of local data, and it has a better UI toolkit, and it can do a lot more caching, so there's a lot of good things you can do. As an example, I can't show you, with Java, you have a very primitive widget tool set, or you can do what's called the canvas view. The canvas view lets you just kind of do whatever you want to, and that's what most people want to do because you can make it look really nice. Has anybody tried Google Mobile Maps, or have they tried Google Mail with the Java client? Okay, it's a significantly better experience than on HTML. But like the things that just drive me nuts is that it says like you have to log in. So you click on login, and in fact we have a little box, right? And it says name and password. You click on it, the screen totally vanishes. This big blue thing comes up with lines, and it looks like you're composing an SMS. And that's how Java asks for text input. Now, you can't, because some phones will actually put a blinking cursor there and let you type. The BlackBerry does that on Java. It's great. You just click, you type, and you're done. But on almost every other phone, and every user test, you lose about 15 to 25% of the people to that one bug right there. So guess where I'm speaking next week? I'm going to Sun next week, and we're going to talk about this. Because those kinds of things really, really cause problems. So Java is kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
I'm
sorry.
So you talked a little bit about this idea of making people more central in the interaction instead of sort of going to a server. I go to my friend. How do you see that model playing out a little bit, both from like what the interaction is actually like, and maybe the standards that would be required to support going to a person instead of a server?
I was excellent question. I was waiting for that because I was very thin on that in my talk, right? Because in effect, what I'm saying is what's very important to Google, and sorry, Don, but we're working on these really cool things. I can't tell you about them yet, right? So, so the big thing about it, I think, is what I was trying to show a glimmer of, was the fact that a phone is a phone, and so therefore you want to find phone numbers and find locations. And when you're out and about, you want to do things like that. So stop making it web-centric and making it more local-based and people-based. Combine that with the fact that there is a world of data out there that is yours. So when I'm looking for things, why don't I look, if I have the contacts on my desktop, if I have the contacts other places, why can't I find them there as well? Now, you kind of hit the nail on the head, though, which is if you really want this to work, you really want to have kind of the semantic web kind of approach, where your data is available and tagged so that the data can be stored in any location. These are my contacts, these are my emails, these are my documents, these are my videos. And so therefore making it accessible so that those things can be found. And so I don't know of any standardization efforts on that point, but that would be a very effective thing to do.
If you could just blink your eyes and there would be one carrier in the United States, what would that carrier then look like? What would it do to make your job easier?
Well, I want to be very careful here because there's different business models. And what I say could be considered to be very naive from a certain perspective, right? Google wants to believe that by providing really good data services and getting rid of this I want you to spend $1 a day on me type of model. We want to have a flat rate so that effectively, I want the phone to be as powerful as a PC was in 1990. Which is I got a pipe and I can do stuff, right? So that to us is the point of allowing innovation. I completely understand that that creates possibly a difficult business model to some people because, let's face it, mobile networks are very expensive to do. The argument is that very, very few people in the United States have data plans. If we could get enough innovation for this to happen, if everybody in the United States spent an extra $15 a month to get a data plan, I think that would make a lot more money for the phone carriers, and so therefore everybody can win, right? So that's where I would like to see it. And to a certain extent, iPhone is also kind of pushing it a little bit. They went one carrier, the data plan comes with it, it has this cute little visual voicemail thing. Very nice ideas, right? That kind of just make it all kind of work together. So, the number one thing for me is just basically easily accessible and reasonably priced data. That combined with the ability to do something like Super Java, so I actually have a development platform that actually can do something interesting with it.
So georeferencing isn't in your list, interestingly, that you know where the phone is. I mean.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure how much time I had. Georeferencing is absolutely very important because, of course, if you're typing if I'm looking for REI, I don't want to find the REI in Portland. I want to find the REI in Sunnyvale. Right, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Do you have opinions about how mobile text entry should change? Is QWERTY from the 19th century or T9 really the best we have to work with?
It's really interesting because that question never comes up in Europe. I really believe that there's a blind spot in the United States that says that, oh my God, if we could just fix text entry, the world would be solved. Because there's, I don't know how many billion text messages are sent a day. I should get the number. Does anybody know, by the way? Just curious, is this number? Yeah. Okay. That's a lot of typing, right? And so, it's kind of fun when I send a text because I'm fairly good at it, and I'll send a text to my son. I've got 3 actually, but my oldest is in college, and I'll send him a text, and I'll say like, "Hey, how you doing?" And you wait like 8 seconds, and boom, I get like a page of stuff back from him, And so it's the new QWERTY, really. So in a sense, it's like they've already learned it. They're fine. Now, the downside with T9 is that it's really good at typing real stuff, like real words, okay? Where it fails actually is in the mobile context. When you really want to search for Mazda RX-7, okay, then T9 is like, oh my God, you got to turn. And so there, it can bite you both ways. So I don't want to be flip, but I mean, I really think it's not as bad as most people say it is. It's getting better all the time, especially in the U.S. Yeah.
I'm wondering if the problem with accessing the web over the phone could be seen as a data access problem. In other words, if there were a way of conveniently accessing or querying for data over a small interface, that might solve the problem of getting the data.
Efficient in what dimension?
Efficient from the user's perspective using the tools available on a cellular phone.
Well, thought experiment. Let's pretend the phone has ESP. And I just think Mazda RX-7, and it shows up. Let's just get rid of that problem entirely, okay? So you get your query, and it's there. Let's also assume data transmission speeds go completely away, okay? I'm still going to get a list of web pages that point to web stuff, right? So I guess my point is in pulling your question apart, I'm trying to figure out at what point are we going to remove it, because there's so many pieces of user pain. Right? Am I missing your point?
No, not necessarily. For example, I typically query at my desktop, what is the HCI topic this week? Who is the speaker? What's the topic? It's very specific and it's very repeatable.
Right.
I might only have to do it
No,
one time in entirety.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things that we're going to be putting into future versions is hopefully a not too complicated way of doing query history. Right? And that's not necessarily going to solve your problem, right? But it's trying to take a step in that direction, right?
Yes, it is. It is a step.
Right. And I don't have it anymore, but these modules that you have, right? You can have lots of different modules on your page, and one of them could be traffic, one of them could be weather, one of them could be CNN, whatever, and one of them could be things that you use the most, so you can just bring them right back very quickly. Okay, and in fact, I would even claim that most likely at some point, if that has an RSS feed, you'd like to just drop it into your reader of choice, which could also be available from that home page. So, okay. Great, I'll be around.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For information on other online Stanford seminars and courses, please visit study.stanford.edu.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.